Welcome back to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Huff. Today, in this segment, for the second half of the program, I am honored to bring two amazing people that are veterans of the indie media universe. Maya Schenwar from Truthout.org. And of course, folks listening to this show know that we have referenced Truthout and their excellent work for ages. And we're also joined by Lara Witt of Prism. I'm going to properly introduce our guests here in a moment, but we're going to have a really wonderful conversation about new developments in the independent media ecosystem. Both Maya and Laura have been really key figures and instrumental in launching a movement media alliance, which I think is just long overdue. Kind of coming in the shadows, of course, of things like the Media Consortium and other kinds of efforts to sort of, do the cat herding in the indie media world. That's a phrase that will probably come up again. But we have a lot of really amazing things to talk about from our guests. So let me please properly introduce them to you all. Maya Schenwar is the director of Truthout Center for Grassroots Journalism, also Truthout's editor at large and board president. Maya is co-editor of The Forthcoming: We Grow the World Together, Parenting Toward Abolition. And we'll certainly be having Maya back on about that book release in the very near future. Maya is also co-author of Prison by Any Other Name: The Harmful Consequences of Popular Reforms, author of Lockdown, Locked Out: Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better, co-editor of the Truthout anthology, Who Do You Serve? Who Do You Protect? Police Violence and Resistance in the United States. In addition to Truthout, Maya's work has appeared in many publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, NBC News, and The Nation. She has appeared on Democracy Now!, MSNBC, C-SPAN, and NPR, other television and radio programs. Maya Schenwar is co-founder of the Movement Media Alliance, MMA, and Media Against Apartheid and Displacement, MAD. Plenty of reasons for us to get mad. She lives in Chicago. Maya Schenwar, welcome to the Project Censored Show.
Thanks so much for having us, Mickey.
It is my pleasure. And also, please allow me to introduce Lara Witt, an award-winning editor and journalist, the editor-in-chief of Prism, co-founder of the Movement Media Alliance and Media Against Apartheid Displacement that I just mentioned. And their goal is to provide platforms for marginalized voices and to reshape the landscape of media altogether as a tool for liberation. So it's no surprise to the Project Censored audience that of course, you're likely familiar with both Prism and Truthout. Certainly have been discussed on the pages of Project Censored. I lost track of how many Truthout stories have made it into our top lists every year. And this year will probably be no exception. Maya Schenwar, let's start with you, and Lara Witt, let's bring you in, of course, conversationally. I'm very excited and interested in the movement media organizations that are coming together to build kind of a new kind of power. The Movement Media Alliance is a coalition working to build a journalism of accountability based on social justice. It's certainly about time. You both wrote an article back in August this year announcing this at truthout.org. Maya, tell us a little bit about this, how this came together.
Yeah. So the Movement Media Alliance, which launched at the end of this past summer, is this coalition of journalism organizations that are specifically social justice driven and independent. And over the past year, a few of us, including initially folks from In These Times and Convergence and Truthout, started thinking about what it might look like to bring in a bunch of people from movement-driven media organizations around the country, bring people together to kind of think about the moment we're in. And at the time, so this was over a year ago when we talked about the moment, we were talking about looming fascism. And coming together to think about the fact that we all have been operating in our separate little silos as news organizations, doing parallel work, oftentimes doing overlapping work, um, but not necessarily thinking about each other or supporting each other or even amplifying each other, even though there's this real potential to actually uplift each other's work in an environment where there is so much competition and it so many opportunities to be drowned out. And we really need the left to be coming together and uplifting each other's messages. And I think the other goal here, if we're really, really honest, is we wanted to help each other not die. So we're seeing all of these organizations, these great, amazing left progressive journalism organizations that had been around for many years just crumbling and falling due to financial constraints, due to all kinds of political repression, due to repression on social media that made it hard to access audience and traffic. And all of these factors kind of coming together in a tough political climate. And we saw outlets dying, doing mass layoffs, having to scale way back, changing their missions. And we thought, okay, we've got to come together to act. Like we cover organizing all the time. We have to organize among ourselves. So we came together for an initial convening in 2023 in November. And initially, we had planned to mostly talk about how are we going to face down looming fascism and how are we going to support each other financially and structurally. And we ended up actually spending most of the time talking about covering Palestine together because it was a month into this escalated genocide. And we were grappling with the fact that not only were we individually experiencing repression as media organizations actually covering the genocide, but that most media organizations were actively doing work to fuel the genocide in these times. And so Lara will tell you more about that, but with Media Against Apartheid and Displacement. But this was an example of a moment for us where we said, okay, we as movement media organizations are stronger together. We can build opportunities for us to uplift each other's work at a time when it's being suppressed, to build on each other's narratives and collaborate with each other editorially at times when, we're never going to have as much reach as the New York Times individually, but together, we can. And so that's just one example. And so yeah, so as we move forward, we're thinking about both those kinds of editorial collaborations and how we can support each other in really concrete ways to become more sustainable so we can stick around and do this work into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So many important points that you just hit, and especially on the left, getting people for back to herding, getting people together. But the left has this bad habit of getting into a circular firing squad, where people spend more time almost sniping at each other over their one disagreement than working together toward common cause. And my goodness, if you didn't just list several common causes that we face and struggles, from censorship and shadow banning to struggle with independent financing, keeping the lights on, keeping this kind of work going. We really have challenges. And then there's the global challenges, certainly what's happening in Gaza, that's on our minds a lot. We've done so many shows on this. I mean, the Committee to Protect Journalists has, been cataloging this. We have record numbers, horrific number of deaths of journalists and media workers, specifically in Gaza, over 100 and at least 128, but it's certainly more than that, certainly more than the 42,000 dead innocent people. It's an absolute calamity. So we have a lot to be reporting about in terms of social justice. And if we can't come together now during these major crises. And of course, we are again on the cusp of another, what shouldn't be a nail biting election, with bad choices all around. This really is a time, I think, for independent media to organize, to get together, and really kind of use this moment to move forward. Lara Witt, let's bring you into the conversation and add to that, particularly, building on what Maya was saying about the Movement Media Alliance, but certainly also Media Against Apartheid and Displacement. And of course, as it factors in any of the amazing work you're doing at Prism. Lara Witt.
Thank you. Yeah, Media Against Apartheid and Displacement came out of that need for a place where people can find reliable, trustworthy journalism on what was happening in Gaza and throughout Palestine itself. And also to be able to give an American audience that has been misled and also very much lied to about the realities of Palestine and Israel. We're up against like undoing a lot of Zionist narratives. And so our work was to be able to show people that a lot of what they had learned wasn't true, and that the apartheid regime that Palestinians live under is one that it does exist. And so what MAD does is provide people with a centralized location where our media organization's work is represented and updated on a regular basis, so that there is a hub where they can go to read and inform themselves and listen. It's the first project of its kind that gathers now 21 different media organizations under a shared goal and shared mission, with a shared mission statement that is like staunchly anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian, pro-liberation, anti-settler colonial. And that's rare for media spaces, which obviously, use the mythology of objectivity to create both sidism and to launder and manufacture consent for genocide and other atrocities that we see in this world. So it was a massive undertaking. We decided that November was like a good time to start working on this project. So we discussed it during our first convening of the Movement Media Alliance, when we weren't titled the Movement Media Alliance yet. We just knew that we wanted to work with each other so desperately, and that this could be like a good first project to work on together to see, what sort of collaborations can come of it, but also to provide a space for us to like not just work, but also to be with each other, to comfort each other, to provide each other with a safe space to vent, to figure out and strategize, and also just have fun. There are so few spaces in media that are fun, and the ones that we've been able to build with each other have just been very joyous and have provided like a sanctuary during times that are difficult for us as media workers to get through. So not only are we doing excellent work, but we're also providing each other with a lot of comfort, care, which then enables us to do even better work. So much of our imagination and our creativity can get sapped by constant chaos and dread and hopelessness. So the spaces in which we can create comfort and a shared politic and organizing really is like it's an antidote to a lot of the despair that we've been experiencing.
That's a wonderful term, antidote. And the idea of doing this in a space that encourages self-care at a time when things are so really off the rails. It's very hard to process this kind of tragic and traumatic information. As you mentioned, it's hard enough to get information out to the rest of the world. Certainly the corporate media from their Tony studios in Jerusalem and wherever, going through IDF and Israeli government censors. The paper of record is telling a very different story than the kind of stories that you see at your organizations. Just very quickly, the website for Media Against Apartheid and Displacement is themad.org, correct? MAAD.
Yes.
So certainly that's one of the websites that we're referring to right now. Lara, the other organization where you're editor-in-chief is prismreports.org, right? I want to make sure that folks are very aware of where to go and find this information. And of course, people have likely heard of Truthout, truthout.org. Lara, just continuing with you for a minute, can you mentioned 21 organizations that are together in this? Can you talk a little bit about who's part of this coalition? How did that kind of come together? Maybe, and obviously you probably see room for more growth or including people that are also already doing this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was easy to start with the first members of Media Against Apartheid and Displacement because a lot of them were already in the room with us when we were talking about creating this hub. So the first ones that were on board were Convergence Magazine, Haymarket Books, In These Times, The Dig, Waging Nonviolence, Prism, of course, The Forge, and then we had Truthout, The Real News Network, and that was the founding. Those were the founding members of MAD, and then we wanted to, of course, bring in people who were based in Palestine in the occupied Palestinian territories, or who were doing work, whose sole mission was to cover what was happening in Palestine from the beginning. We wanted to work with Palestinian editors and reporters, so we contacted the Institute for Palestine Studies. They have a English language blog that is a part of that is headed up by Laura Albast. It's called Palestine Square. And we had started sharing so many of their pieces to Matt anyways. We brought on Mondo Vice, and then we brought on smaller publications that are all movement journalism aligned. So places like Briar Patch, the Kansas City Defender, the Public Source, which is based in Beirut in Lebanon, The Objective, obvious, and of course, Analyst News, and a couple podcasts too. So we have folks from a small podcast called Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. They do really excellent analysis and work there. And I've been a huge fan of theirs for such a long time. So it was such an honor that they joined us. Hammer and Hope joined us recently as well. It's just this growing collective is very much, it's very empowering. It's showing us there is a strong contingent of publications that are doing the kind of work that is exceptionally necessary in this moment, and that we don't have to rely on mainstream media sources. There are places that you can go to, and we're just trying to make it as easy as possible for people to find them.
Absolutely. And, Maya Schenwar, if only the corporate media could find these websites, if only the well-educated journalists from the best schools in the country, if only these journalists were also media literate enough to
Yeah.
look at their own sort of profession and sources. I mean,
Gosh.
gosh, I mean, how is it that we're out here doing this? We know about it. You're all doing this. You're all rattling off names. I mean, there are even more groups and people that are doing things. How do you think it is that we're steeped in this and we don't seem to have a problem finding, but yet all the folks out there in the corporate media universe, they kind of just look, they can't even look askance at it. They don't seem to know we're here. What do
Yeah,
you make of that?
we get these little inklings that they know we're here when they kind of either poach our stories, like oh, we know where that came from,
Uh,
or they'll grab little bits, little tidbits that we've broken or things we've exposed, and sometimes they'll throw us a link. And sometimes our goal really is to catapult an issue into the mainstream, and we certainly celebrate it, even if we're not given full credit. So
Absolutely.
it's, they, I think that they do kind of know we're here,
Yeah.
but I think it is a matter of how the institutions of journalism are viewed, the idea of what journalism is supposed to be. And this idea of objectivity, which we've touched on a couple of times today, that holds that truth is not about the things that we talk about within MMA: accuracy, accountability, transparency, principled journalism that's values driven. It's not about that. It's about quote unquote balance for a lot of these mainstream publications, which means, if you interview someone who's not a fascist, then you also have to interview a fascist to balance them out, and can't give one more space than the other because, that
Yeah.
wouldn't be fair. And so in those kinds of ways, truth is actually really distorted. I also think another thing that I've been kind of, I was gonna say noodling around, but I don't know why I'm experiencing the impulse to say noodling around because I don't even know what it means. But one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is fact checking. So Truthout has two fact checkers. We're very accuracy driven. We think about it all the time. But within the mainstream world, the idea of fact checking, when it's present, because a lot of mainstream and corporate outlets have actually cut their fact checking, but when it is present, very often the way it's being done is invasive and exploitative. And we see situations where people have to kind of prove their trauma and those types of things. And you have to do that to be taken seriously as a journalism organization sometimes. And I think, for example, criminalized people often face, well, show me your criminal record. Show me all the things you've been arrested for and which you've been convicted. I know one time I was interviewed about the circumstances. Well, I was interviewed about reform and abolition, but the topic of my sister's death came up. And afterwards, I had to send in my sister's death certificate 3 months after she died. And so I go on this tangent to mention that the definition of journalism within those mainstream corporate bounds, the definition of good and principled journalism is really, really skewed, often against humanity. And so whether they're taking us seriously, sometimes I feel like not being taken seriously by them or being seen as quote unquote biased is a badge of honor.
Yeah, it's truly in the muckraking tradition going back well over 100 years. Ida Tarbell didn't objectively talk about the Rockefellers after they wrecked her family.
Right.
I mean,
Ida B. Wells wasn't objectively talking about lynching.
talking about the muckraking tradition and the issues of objectivity. And look, George Seldes in the mid 20th century was clear about this, saying, like, look, the job of journalists isn't to be, quote, objective. It's to tell the public what's really going on. It's to inform the public in a meaningful way that leads to civic engagement. And that means telling oftentimes uncomfortable truths. It means often offending the very people that own the press. As A.J. Liebling quipped, the best way to ensure freedom of the press is to own one. And unfortunately, we still live in that kind of world in some ways. But in other ways, the work that you're both doing and these great coalitions that you're bringing together, you're reminding us that journalism is something for everyone and it is in the public interest. And that these organizations that you're working with under the MMA umbrella, they all have this moral compass that's going in this direction, that's looking at what's really going on around the world that needs to be addressed and what can be done about it and how can we collectively do it. How can we do it together? And Lara Witt, we want to bring you back in to this and expand on what we were just saying here before the break. And you mentioned earlier in the conversation, Lara, about the challenges of objectivity. And again, on the surface, you're like, well, the implication of being not objective is that you're not wrong or something, or that there's some flawed issue. But yet we don't see anybody calling out the lack of objectivity in corporate media when they both side things to death, quite literally, even if the evidence is preponderously on one side of an issue. The climate crisis screams to mind over the last couple of decades. But Lara, let's bring you back in here and talk a little bit more about some of those issues and how the work that of MMA, the work of MAD, is really doing something different. And I'd love to bring in some more of the concepts of media literacy and education as to how that informs this reporting. Lara Witt, please.
Yeah, there's a quote that sits above my desk that a friend sent me on a postcard. It's a quote by Ruben Salazar. Newsroom objectivity may result in an absence of truth. That is indeed the case. So Prism itself is is led by BIPOC reporters, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color reporters. Our entire newsroom is staffed by BIPOC. And it's not that necessarily rooted in like representational politics, but it's just the understanding that people of color and that marginalized people are best positioned to cover the issues that are affecting their communities. Not only because we have shared experience and shared culture, but also because we understand the nuances of our different cultures, and we just are very best positioned to see and understand and share accurately the things that are happening to us. They don't get like muddled or lost in a translation of whitewashing. And they're not, our stories are also not going to be positioned within a context that questions the integrity of our experiences, that questions us as our humanity as people. So often, Black and brown voices are doubted, or they're like framed around police quotes or politicians who frankly don't give a fuck about them and only court them when it comes to voting. And so our position at Prism, or our mission at Prism, is to ensure that like not only are we doing justice to our communities, but that the sort of stories that we cover ensure that people are going to be deeply engaged in their communities and are going to be incentivized to organize around the issues that are affecting them. So not just like, once every 4 years at the ballot box, you drop in your little thing and then you fuck off for the rest of the year, but that you are engaged in ensuring that the people around you are cared for, that you can engage in mutual aid, that you can organize and ensure that your school boards are well equipped and are with people who care about the students that are in them. It has this whole ripple effect. Movement journalism does. It has a whole ripple effect that ensures that people are going to be more engaged, that people are going to be able to actually fight for the things that they care about. And ultimately, so much of that is going to be for liberation. And there's a very good reason for why movement journalism is severely underfunded. And there's a very good reason for why we're all coming together under either a shared politic or a super similar politic, is so that we can ensure that journalism, one, is accessible for journalists of color and marginalized people, or people who come from lower class and working class backgrounds, but also so that we can retain them for longer periods of time. Journalism is not a very well-paying job. And I can let Maya go into this a little bit further. Some of the plans that we have for the Movement Media Alliance is to ensure that not only is this a job that we love to do, but it's something that intergenerationally will continue to benefit us, our families, the people around us, and our communities.
Maya?
Yeah, I think that's this reality that we sometimes skate around when we're talking about this field, particularly movement media, journalism more broadly, but especially social justice driven media, that being in this field, well, you're doing the work because you love it. So you're not going to think about your salary. You're not going to think about your benefits. You're not going to worry about your retirement or what's going to happen to you if you get really sick. And that's not really conducive to being a human being on planet Earth. And so I think that one thing that we're grappling with in coming together is that these issues are real too. And when we talk about sustaining the field, we're not only talking about making sure that our organizations don't go into the red and eventually teeter over and die. It's also about the people involved. And it's about thinking about like what kind of field do we want this to be? And how long do we want people to be able to sustain, to stay in this field, as opposed to breaking off and becoming consultants or going into philanthropy or going into academia? No offense, Mickey. And I think that,
I'm taken.
these are kind of like the real things all of us think about as we approach middle age. And we're like, someday I would like to be not working, because that's just human. And so as we come together, we're talking about what would it look like to develop a shared health insurance pool among movement media so that we can get a good plan for all of us and be taken care of if we get sick, What would it look like to maybe even someday have a movement media pension fund so that all of us can stay in this field with the reassurance that we can someday retire? What would it look like to pool our resources and get some foundational backing for cybersecurity services and ways of keeping ourselves safe in the face of all this repression? And so some of these concrete steps that might not sound super shiny and exciting from the outside are critical pieces of infrastructure for us to be able to maintain this field, grow this field, and stay in it over the long haul.
I couldn't agree more. And, what you just said about, academia, I'm a rare character in that world. I've been tight roping it for some time now, 25 years. And but Project Censored was founded on a campus in John Dewey fashion, that teaching and education is liberating. I mean, Paulo Freire, it's liberation. Critical scholarship is so important, and that's why we talk about critical media literacy, not corporate, not acritical, not just gadgets and tech, but really interrogating systems of power and enabling and empowering, especially young people, but people of all ages, how to not only interact with media, how to understand and ask questions, but how to be the media. And of course, that's something that I think you're both modeling rather extraordinarily in these efforts. That's no small thing. And again, this little sliver of academia that I've been able to exist in, like, let's not forget, that was Project Censors at a state university. I've been teaching at a community college for decades. It's only
Right.
recently that I've been over at Ithaca running the Park Center for Independent Media,
Yeah.
founded by Jeff Cohen, because once again, you had somebody that was interested in it, wanted to preserve it. But again, it's like an adjunct afterthought. It's like, well, wait a minute, isn't this what journalism is anyway? Why is
Right.
it like an extra special thing that there's a Project Censored or a Center for Independent Media? I thought it was just journalism, right? And that really gets back to what both of you have said earlier, is looking at what the corporate press are and what they do. And yes, they do crib things from the indie media at times, and we applaud when they do because they have platforms and they're doing their job for a change. But it's just too few and far between. And that's why I've just was very excited about the Media Movement Alliance that you're both putting together. And I'm very much looking forward to talking more with you and learning more about it and seeing how we can be part of these solutions moving forward, especially. At least from our angle of Project Censored, we're very interested in infusing critical media literacy, pedagogy, and education into the independent media universe. And I think that you all are pretty hip to that. We've only got a couple minutes left. Of course, that's how this always ends, isn't it? And in the couple minutes we have left, say the most important things, right? Where conclude on where we're going and how the world will be saved. But Lara Witt, let's go to you for those final couple of minutes, and then we'll go back to Maya Schenwar. Talk to us a little bit about what's coming up. Maybe I know we're on the cusp of another election, and we're going to be very busy after that, regardless of the outcome, one way or another. We may have harder work with one outcome than another, and different work, but work nonetheless, especially for people in the independent media sphere. Lara Witt, and also again, please feel free to share any places people can follow you or get in touch and see the amazing work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I think one of the things that I'd like people to take away from this is that don't let mainstream media make you think that that is what journalism is, or that this is what media is. It isn't. There are people who have been doing excellent, amazing, groundbreaking, just earth-shattering work that matters so much to us, that has huge ripple effects, not just in people's everyday lives, but also more largely within policy and organizing. And so don't get lost in like in social media itself, or even just like weirdly like influencer translated news bites. If if you are turned off by mainstream media, go to movement journalism, look for movement journalism, look at the Movement Media Alliance, look at the organizations that are a part of that and support them. Like the only way that we continue to thrive is really with reader loyalty, with their support. And it's a symbiotic relationship. It's one that we should be constantly aware of and nurturing as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, and the subscription service and getting directly being, being in touch directly with the communities that are reporting and you're reporting on, right? Because shadow banning and deplatforming and demonetization from big tech and various censorship by proxy efforts are well afoot. And these are challenges that we all face, especially independent media outlets. They really struggle with those. So it's important to have direct connection to the people that you need support from and you're reporting to. Maya Schenwar, the same for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a crucial point, is that we're accountable to our readers, and part of that is we are not funded by big corporations. We're not funded by advertising. We're not funded by the parties, the political parties. They're not giving us their money. So we need readers. We need you. And so I say that not as a fundraising push, although it is one, but also as a reality of this sphere that the readers also have a responsibility in terms of sustaining it and making it possible. And I'll also say, looking into the future, this sense that we don't know what kind of future we're going to be facing requires a certain amount of scenario planning and thinking about the different kinds of waves that might be hitting us over the next few months and years. And one thing we've been talking about in the Movement Media Alliance is that journalism organizations may well be directly targeted, including those of us who are 501c3s. We certainly saw under the Patriot Act how that played out, how organizations' assets were frozen and 501c3 statuses were taken away, so places could not accept grants and donations in the same ways. We
Congress is
know
doing it
that
again, as you know. They're trying to do it again.
exactly. So we're seeing the same types of things coming back around, and we need to kind of get past our historical amnesia and recognize that this not only could happen again, it is happening again. We saw in the UK a journalist at Al Jazeera having their laptop seized, being raided. I mean, this is direct journalistic repression, and of course, the worst of which is journalists actually being killed and arrested and injured in Gaza at these very, very high rates. And so I think that coming together also allows us that chance to plan for a future that is, quite frankly, terrifying. And we need to intensify our efforts going forward.
Well, absolutely, we do. But I'm actually heartened, taking away from the conversation that we just had, that because of people like you two and all the people that you're getting together and the people that you're really bringing people together to do this work. It's really amazing. It's an honor to talk to both of you, and I'm really looking forward to being more part of some of what you're all doing. And I commend you for really trying to do this because it's something that's really been missing in the independent media world. You mentioned earlier, Maya, about siloing and competing almost, but journalism isn't a sport. We're not competing,
Right.
right? It's about collaborating and building these big networks. And both of you are doing an extraordinary job. Maya Schenwar, Truthout.org, Lara Witt, PrismReports.org, both co-founders of Movement Media Alliance and Media Against Apartheid and Displacement. Thanks to both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on the Project Censored Show today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.